stories behind the mysterious episode, Are You Happy Now? But I can tell you the true story behind it all. I had worked for Nickelodeon Studios for at least a decade or so. Specifically, it was from late Season 3 to Season 10. Honestly, I've forgotten because it seemed like forever. I worked behind the scenes as a storyboard artist, but never played a main role in writing or directing episodes. Of course, a lot of things happen in my day-to-day time at work, but there are just some episodes that I genuinely felt uncomfortable in doing. And there was, of course, the infamous The Splinter episode. But there's this one episode that I loathed doing, trying to avoid working on it as best as I could. Surprisingly, I'm sure you all may recognize it. It's Are You Happy Now from Season 8. Now, Season 8 was a very weird season for us, and probably for you too. It was, of course, the last standard definition season, and the fact that some episodes were being premiered at the same time as Season 9. But there was a serious problem with this particular episode that caused many people to leave when the season was finished. See, we have a very weird and confusing way of counting episodes. There's a production order, pairing order, and airing order. For the sake of organization, we simply go by the pairing order. I know what you're thinking. It's like The Simpsons. Well, yeah, true, but I can tell you that this is probably the case for every single show, especially Nickelodeon shows. Let me just say that it confused us more than it confused you. There's production members that get skipped, and then there's this weird anomaly in one of the Season 8 episodes restraining Spongebob. In particular, had production code 814A, not 814, but 814A. More confusingly, there is no 814B. Why is that? Well, the answer is harder than you think. See, episode 814B actually did exist, but it was scrapped at one point and replaced with a newer episode with the same name, Are You Happy Now? Production numbers were skipped either because of oversight or the episode was produced but cancelled at a later date. And this, of course, was just one of those examples. What I found more interesting is that this was around the time my coworker, Nate, left the series, leaving Mark to replace him. In case you've been living under a rock, Mark is also one of the showrunners of Modern Spongebob. He's also one of the writers and directors of the newer version of Are You Happy Now? After we finished the episode, Nathan just disappeared out of nowhere. He just left, and nobody knew exactly why he left, but he just did. When I asked my coworkers about what had happened, I got conflicting stories, either saying that he left, was fired, or had no idea what had actually happened. Others just told a story that didn't make any sense at all. Recently, I worked on a few episodes of Tiny Toon's Looneyverse with him. He was also an executive producer for that show, and while he didn't recognize me at first, we soon began to remember each other and went on a full-fledged conversations with him during our break times that we had together. We were talking about our years on SpongeBob, and it just so happened that the Are You Happy Now episode came to my mind. But when I brought it up to him, he was at first confused and had no idea what I was talking about. After a while, he told me to see him after work and maybe he would be able to better explain the full story, but said that he didn't exactly have the time to explain it at the moment. And after my day of storyboarding for that show, Nate came up to me and said that he indeed worked on Are You Happy Now? For his last episode of SpongeBob. He also told me that he left because he felt that SpongeBob wasn't getting better and that his name was being put on horrible episodes like The Splinter, Truth or Square, You Don't Know Sponge, and so many other episodes. He also told me that he was the one that came up with the infamous suicide joke as a protest against how Nickelodeon had changed for the worst. These jokes actually made it into the modern episode. I initially responded saying that it was a bit extreme, but he did say that Nickelodeon deserved its reputation and said that Cartoon Network had been a much better place for him. He ended it by saying that he remembered having a copy of the original episode and would look for the original cartoon. And then, if he found it, he'd call me up to his office to show the footage, if I agreed to it. I confidently agreed and said to find the drafts that he wrote for the episode, if he had any. He said he would try and find some and then bid me goodbye for the day. The next day, I went on with my workday, and during my break I was watching the newer version of the episode when Nate called me over. He told me that he was able to find the original episode and had a copy of it, that he had exclusively made for me to see and keep. He also warned me that the episode could contain disturbing images, but I still wanted to watch it out of curiosity. From there, he showed the episode in its original state and I began to take a few notes about it. The first thing I noted was the title card, which instead of the playing happy upbeat music, had a sad and slow tune and the faces had sad faces and were colored a darker blue. Also, Nate Cash was credited instead of Mark, given that he had worked on this particular version of the episode. Other than that, most of the episode was pretty much the same, but the voice acting was a bit different. Nothing notably different, but it didn't align with the current incarnation of the episode. Much of the story with Squidward trying to discover his happiest memory is about the same, despite bad things happening to him and then ultimately deciding that he just couldn't be happy. At the 2 weeks later time card, Nate stopped the episode and made a brief comment talking about how that actually made it through the final version. Eventually, like the original, SpongeBob gets concerned and tries to get Squidward's attention. Just like the new version, he's clinically depressed and borderline suicidal. But something was different about this episode, and I couldn't exactly tell, but something felt off. It looks as if Squidward was apparently attempting to end himself already. But other than that, everything else was about the same. Even the joke about Squidward trying to end himself with carbon dioxide poisoning, only to pull out brownies, was still there. He checks his fax machine, which then explodes. A bubble transition happens, and SpongeBob and Gary are there at the door at Squidward's house. Unlike the new version, SpongeBob doesn't look like he was assembled from any paper shreds. Then the infamous cutaway gag to Squidward seemingly trying to hang himself played. Indeed, he did actually hang himself. When he did so, he kicked the chair beneath him, but the entire house began to collapse and a cartoon-like explosion happens in the process. Then cuts to SpongeBob, who looks genuinely sad about Squidward and thinks of something that could hopefully cheer him up. A bubble transition occurs, and at the Krusty Krab he sets up a party for Squidward full of 100 papier-mâché SpongeBobs, just like the newer version. Except, he not only destroys the figurines with a chainsaw, but he also attacks SpongeBob too, and laughs maniacally as the episode continues on before finally ending. I'll admit, I was pretty surprised by that. Not only because of the content, but how much of the episode had actually managed to make it into the original, the newer version. It wasn't overtly disturbing, but it was still exceedingly unsettling. Nate told me that he wrote the disturbing scenes mostly as a joke, quote-unquote, but he himself was also kind of surprised that those scenes actually had made it in the same... He was actually quite surprised that those scenes actually made it into the newer cut. He said that his co-workers thought that what he was doing was wrong, but he brought up the episode one-course meal as an excuse to justify his work. He made a funny remark about how those scenes were a metaphor of saying that he just couldn't take it anymore, doing SpongeBob and then having to do the extreme to get himself out of it. I honestly couldn't resist but chuckling at that. And he concluded saying that he indeed got fired and never came back to SpongeBob ever again after that, and then went on to say that he couldn't believe the episode was this close to being aired on television, but was recycled into a newer one. He told me to keep the DVD, but to not give it away, stating that it could cause some serious problems. He then let me go and said that I should go back to working. And for sure, I did enjoy the conversation, as bad as the episode he had made was, though. Now I was excited. I just knew that there was more behind the production of the episode that Nate didn't tell me. Yeah, apparently the episode and its sister episode, Planet of the Jellyfish, were supposed to air earlier on, but was abruptly changed because of how the episode went. When they made the new episode, they got rid of Nate Cash's name, gave it to a new production code 833, and modified a lot of the episode to make it a little bit more kid-friendly, while keeping in much of the adult innuendo that Nate had wrote in. There's gotta be more behind the story of the episode. Maybe the other 3 people that worked on the episode know more, but sadly, I don't have any of those 3 people in my contacts. Maybe someday I'll go back there and find out the whole story. But I doubt anybody would really remember, and even if they do, they probably would make up stories and probably lie about it to cover their asses. Maybe this whole thing might actually remain a mystery after all. But at least I do know most of it. Well, at least for now, that is.
In fear and surprise, as your eyes widen, your mouth goes dry with each battered breath. You try to scream, your mind begs to leave, glued to your computer screen. The killers they slash, the tapes burn and crash. The cartridge you bought will be your final haunt. The rituals of hate will seal your fate. The tears you shed will be from the fear-gripping, horror-driven, nightmarish, gore-filled, terrorizing, hateful, burning, violent, rage-inducing, knife-slashing, blood-splattering, silent screams. Only time will tell if you will escape this online hell. Your horror-filled obsessions will come with its own regressions. Your pathetic screams will not be heeded in any way, because your nightmares will come at